Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to stand on the edge of history, knowing that a single step could ignite a chain of events powerful enough to shatter an entire republic? What if I told you that one man, under the cover of night, faced a choice so daring, so reckless, that it would forever change the fate of Rome and echo through history as both triumph and treachery? Tonight, we step into the shadows of ancient Rome, to witness a moment where courage, ambition, and sheer audacity collided. We will follow Julius Caesar as he marched toward destiny, knowing that crossing the Rubicon River would mark the point of no return. The air is thick with tension, whispers of conspiracy, and the silent watch of a city on the brink of chaos. Every heartbeat counts. Every decision could spell glory or doom. But here's the question you need to ask yourself. What would you do if the weight of the world rested on your shoulders? Would you risk everything for power, for change, or for legacy? Stay with me because in the next few minutes, we'll uncover secrets, betrayals, and a decision that shattered centuries of tradition. And by the end of this story, you'll see history from a perspective you've never imagined. The whisper of a republic on the edge. Have you ever felt a moment so charged with danger that the air itself seems to hold its breath? Imagine standing where centuries of law, tradition, and honor collide with raw ambition. That was the night Julius Caesar stood before the Rubicon River, and the entire Roman Republic trembled without even realizing it. Rome had grown restless. The Senate, once the bastion of republican order, had become a maze of intrigue and silent threats. Whispers echoed through the marble halls. Some feared Caesar's rise, others envied it, and a few secretly prayed he would challenge the fragile equilibrium. In the Forum, the merchants closed their shutters early, and the torchlight flickered against statues of ancestors long dead, casting shadows like accusing eyes. Rome itself seemed to hold its breath. Sensing the storm to come, Caesar walked through the night, cloaked and silent, yet every step carried the weight of destiny. He had returned from Gaul, his legions victorious, their loyalty unwavering. But Rome was not a battlefield for soldiers. It was a labyrinth of senators, lawyers, and whispers. Crossing the Rubicon meant more than breaking a law. It meant breaking the heart of the republic itself. Could one man's ambition justify the downfall of centuries of tradition? The letters had come, sealed with the authority of the Senate. Orders to disband his legions. Threats hidden in polite phrases. Caesar read them carefully, his eyes tracing each line as though he could find the hidden dagger in the words. Around him, the night was still, except for the distant sound of wolves and the occasional crackle of a torch. He folded the letters, tucking them into his tunic, and stepped closer to the riverbank. Behind him, the campfires of his loyal legions burned like silent sentinels. Soldiers murmured in half-dreams, unaware of the true weight of their general's thoughts. Would he obey the Senate? Would he turn away and preserve the fragile peace of Rome? Or would he step forward, crossing the line, rewriting history with a single, irreversible act? The Rubicon lay before him, its dark waters reflecting the pale moon. Legends would remember this river not for its size, but for the decision it witnessed. Caesar's mind raced through possibilities, alliances, betrayals. He thought of Pompey, once a comrade in arms, now a political rival entrenched in Rome's power structures. The thought of confronting Pompey was like staring into the mouth of a lion deadly, inevitable and unavoidable. And then, almost imperceptibly, a thought crept into his mind. What if he hesitated? Hesitation could mean annihilation, not just of himself, but of the dream of Rome he carried silently in his heart. Could he justify a lifetime of victories in Gaul if he allowed fear to dictate his next move? The question burned hotter than the torches around the camp. Somewhere deep in the shadows of history, an old senator would later claim that Rome itself shivered that night, sensing the coming rupture. The air was thick with a tension so dense it could almost be touched, a tension that whispered of betrayal, ambition, and an inevitable reckoning. Caesar adjusted the folds of his cloak, the soft rustle breaking the eerie silence. Each step toward the Rubicon echoed louder than any drum in the empire, announcing a choice that could not be undone. And yet, even in this moment of poised destiny, a twist lurked unnoticed. Not everyone in Caesar's camp agreed with the decision he seemed poised to make. A messenger arrived, breathless, eyes wide with fear and urgency. He carried news that threatened to unravel the careful calculations Caesar had made in Gaul, a rebellion in one of the provinces. A faction within the Senate preparing to strike at his rear. Suddenly, the path to glory was entangled with peril he had not fully imagined. Caesar paused, listening to the murmurs of the river, feeling the weight of history pressing on him. The moonlight danced across the water, whispering promises of immortality and damnation in equal measure. To step forward would be to embrace both. To turn back would be to betray not only himself, but the legions who had trusted him, the people who believed in his vision and the destiny that history seemed to demand God. And then, in a breathless heartbeat, the silence was broken. A distant shout a scout returning from the riverbank announced that the bridge ahead had been sabotaged. The river, which had seemed merely a barrier of water, had now become a symbol of impossible choice. To cross meant civil war, betrayal, and death. To retreat meant humiliation, betrayal of one's own honor, and the crushing weight of what if. Caesar's gaze fell on the dark, restless water. He inhaled the night, tasting fear, ambition, and inevitability all at once. The river had become more than a body of water. It was a mirror of the Republic itself, reflecting its fragility, its divisions, and its looming collapse. The moment stretched infinitely. Every second was a lifetime. Every heartbeat a drumbeat of history. And then he whispered to himself, almost inaudibly, a phrase that would be etched into eternity, Alea iacta est. The die is cast, and just as he stepped forward, crossing into legend, the shadows behind him stirred. A messenger, racing from the Senate, carried news that could change everything, even now, even at this final step. The words were urgent, explosive, and dangerous. They would make Caesar question everything he thought he knew about allies, enemies, and the fragile threads holding Rome together. The river waited silently. The legions held their breath, and the Republic teetered on the brink. Every eye was on Caesar, yet none could see the full web of destiny tightening around him. One step, one decision, and the course of history was forever altered, and as the night deepened, a question lingered in the minds of those watching. And in ours as we peer back through history, did Caesar truly act for Rome or for himself? And what unseen forces were about to strike, turning victory into chaos before the first sword had even fallen? The answer, hidden in the shadows of the Rubicon, would reveal itself soon. But for now, history held its breath. The march of shadows, have you ever wondered what it feels like when the air itself seems to thrum with anticipation, as if the earth is holding its breath for the outcome of one man's choice? What if every step you took could ignite a war the likes of which the world had never seen? Tonight we walk alongside Julius Caesar as he advances from the Rubicon, carrying not just his legions, but the fragile hopes and terrors of a republic on the brink. The early morning fog clung to the banks of the river like a ghostly shroud, curling around the polished armor of the soldiers and the glinting edges of Caesar's sword. The river had been crossed, but the echoes of that decision spread far and wide, stirring Rome in ways even the most cunning senators could not fully predict. Whispers of betrayal traveled faster than the wind. Letters flew across the city walls, bearing warnings, pleas, and threats, each one a thread in a web of uncertainty that threatened to entangle all who dared oppose him. Caesar's legions marched with silent precision, their discipline unshakable, yet their minds were alive with speculation. They had followed him through frostbitten campaigns and bloodied fields, through victories that had made Rome tremble with awe. But this march was different. There were no distant enemies to fight here, no Gaulish tribes to conquer. The battlefield was political, invisible, and deadly. Every village they passed seemed asleep, but Caesar knew the eyes of the Republic were upon him. Every torchlight behind shuttered windows was a witness, a potential informant. The first real sign of resistance came sooner than he expected. Scouts reported that Pompey, once his ally, had gathered forces in the north, calling upon old loyalties, promising rewards and vengeance. Caesar's mind raced. Pompey's army would be formidable, but disunity among his political opponents was Caesar's secret advantage. Even now, fear and envy fractured the Senate, making allies of some who had sworn loyalty to his enemies. Strategy was as much a weapon as the swords and spears his soldiers carried. By midday, the sun had pierced through the morning mist, revealing the path toward Rome, a city unprepared for the storm approaching from the north. Caesar stopped to study a map, tracing the roads with a gloved finger. Every road, every hill, every river bend could hide both threat and opportunity. He paused, sensing the weight of history pressing down on him again. The Rubicon was behind him. There was no turning back. Every glance to the horizon whispered the same question. Would the Republic crumble, or would he bend it to his will? Yet the march was not unopposed. Reports of small ambushes began trickling in, sentries taken by surprise, villages resisting quietly, as if Rome itself were sending subtle warnings. Caesar's commanders debated fiercely. Some advised caution, arguing that rushing forward could isolate their forces, leaving them vulnerable to a coordinated strike from Pompey. Others, echoing Caesar's instinct, demanded momentum, believing that hesitation would be fatal. Caesar listened, weighing each voice, each argument, yet his mind seemed to exist elsewhere, balancing probability and ambition, history and legacy. That night, as the campfires burned low and the soldiers whispered among themselves, a messenger arrived with news that made Caesar pause more than any river or road ever could. A faction within the Senate had formed a secret council, intending to declare him a traitor, to mobilize Rome itself against him. They had hidden allies among local governors, legions who might switch sides at the critical moment. Suddenly, the path to power seemed even more treacherous. What had been a bold gamble now threatened to become a deadly trap. Caesar knew he had to act decisively. He summoned his closest generals, men whose loyalty had been forged in the crucible of Gaul, men who understood that this march was more than a military maneuver, it was a test of destiny. In the flickering light of the camp, strategies were whispered and debates grew heated. Every decision carried consequences beyond imagination. To hesitate was to invite disaster. To rush forward without caution could be just as fatal. In the hours before dawn, Caesar walked alone along the perimeter of the camp, staring at the distant outlines of Roman rooftops, imagining the Senate chambers where his enemies plotted. The air smelled of frost and smoke, the quiet punctuated only by the murmur of sentries and the occasional clatter of armor. He knew that when Rome awoke, it would awaken to a different world, a world in which one man's ambition had rewritten the rules of power. The first skirmish came as dawn broke, sudden and violent. A small detachment of Pompey's forces had intercepted Caesar's supply line, hoping to starve his army into submission. The clash was brutal but brief. Caesar's disciplined legions repelled the attackers, but the encounter revealed a frightening truth. Pompey was not merely waiting. He was watching, learning, preparing to strike with precision. And Caesar realized something chilling. Every victory on the march would not only advance him toward Rome, but also tighten the noose around his own choices. By mid-morning, rumors reached him that some of his own allies had begun to question their loyalty. Governors who had pledged support in Gaul were wavering, unsure whether to stand with him or hedge their bets in the uncertain chaos about to engulf Rome. Caesar's face remained impassive. But inside, he felt the familiar sting of isolation that had marked so many of his greatest campaigns. Leadership was not just about courage, it was about calculation, about anticipating the unexpected, and tonight, the unexpected loomed larger than ever, and then came the twist that would change the night entirely. A messenger, breathless and bloodied, arrived from a nearby town with news that the Senate had secretly commissioned a contingent of mercenaries to harass Caesar's rear. The war he had anticipated as inevitable on the streets of Rome was now unfolding before him in ways he had not predicted. Every mile forward was a gamble, every decision a potential catastrophe. The Rubicon had been crossed, yes, but the river of destiny he had entered was wider, darker and more treacherous than he had imagined. Caesar's mind raced. Could he trust his own commanders completely? Could he rely on the loyalty of legions whose hearts were loyal but whose lives were mortal? Every shadow along the road could hide betrayal. Every quiet village could conceal spies. Yet he knew he had to maintain momentum. To stop now would be to surrender the advantage he had fought so fiercely to secure. As night fell again, Caesar camped on the edge of a small forest, the trees whispering in the wind like a chorus of unseen witnesses. He walked among his soldiers, offering quiet words of reassurance, but every glance betrayed the tension in the air. His generals huddled nearby, debating the next move, each suggestion weighed against uncertainty and fear. And Caesar realized that while he had crossed the Rubicon physically, the real crossing, the crossing into full-scale civil war, was only just beginning. The camp settled into uneasy silence, but sleep was a distant memory. Messages came sporadically, rumors spread like wildfire, and Caesar's mind refused rest. Somewhere in the shadows, enemies were moving, allies were wavering, and Rome itself seemed poised to erupt in chaos. Every heartbeat carried the echo of destiny. And as the moon rose high over the horizon, Caesar's eyes fell on the distant lights of Rome, shimmering like a promise and a threat all at once. He knew that tomorrow would bring the first real confrontation, the moment when words could no longer sway men, when only steel, strategy, and sheer will would decide the fate of the Republic. And just before the darkness swallowed the camp, a sudden shout pierced the night, a scout returning from the outskirts of the forest, breathless, pale, and carrying news that would force Caesar to question everything he thought he knew about his enemies and even his own allies. The words he heard made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Rome awaited, but it was not the Rome he had imagined. The game had changed, and tonight the pieces were moving on their own. History would remember the march. But the true story, the one unfolding in that dark, tense night, was far from over. The eyes of Rome. Have you ever felt the weight of 1,000 expectations pressing down on you at once, each one whispering both fear and destiny into your ear? Imagine walking through a city that sleeps unaware, while unseen forces gather, plotting, scheming, ready to shape your fate. This is Rome, and Julius Caesar is on its doorstep. Yet the Republic itself seems to watch him like a predator waiting for the slightest misstep. The city was eerily quiet. Even the Tiber, usually lively with merchant traffic and barges, seemed subdued as though sensing the storm approaching. Caesar's scouts moved like shadows along the roads, reporting signs of resistance, murmurs of loyalty, and hidden threats. Every street, every alley, every torch-lit window seemed to hold secrets that could unravel a general's carefully laid plans in an instant. Inside the Senate, panic rippled beneath the veneer of civility. Senators paced marble halls, clutching scrolls and letters, voices low and urgent. Some spoke of Caesar as a tyrant, others as a hero wronged by political rivals. Every argument was layered with ambition and fear, alliances forming and dissolving like smoke. The air was thick with tension, and no one knew which whispers to trust, which threats to act upon, or which promises were hollow. Caesar, meanwhile, moved with calculated purpose. He had anticipated opposition, but the complexity of the web surrounding Rome was becoming clear. Messages arrived from governors, some pledging loyalty, others hinting at betrayal. His generals, seasoned and loyal, advised caution. The path to the city gates was narrow, and a misstep could be fatal. Yet Caesar knew that hesitation was more dangerous than any ambush. Momentum was his ally, fear his enemy. As the first columns of his legions approached the outskirts of the city, an unexpected twist jolted the camp. Word came that a faction loyal to Pompey had begun rallying support among local militias, preparing to cut off Caesar's supplies and trap his forces. The danger was immediate and pressing. To proceed without dealing with this threat could leave Caesar surrounded, isolated and vulnerable. That night, beneath a crescent moon, Caesar convened a council of war. The generals gathered, their faces lit by torchlight, every expression revealing tension and uncertainty. The air smelled of fire, sweat, and anticipation. Caesar spoke, his voice low but firm, outlining a plan that balanced boldness and caution. Each word was a calculation, each pause deliberate, designed to convey confidence while masking concern. The plan was risky. A small contingent would move to intercept the militias, neutralizing the threat before it could grow. Simultaneously, Caesar would continue the main advance toward Rome, maintaining the illusion of unbroken momentum. It was a delicate maneuver, requiring precision, trust, and a willingness to gamble lives for the sake of history. The night passed slowly. Caesar walked among his soldiers, offering quiet words, listening, observing. He understood their fear, their uncertainty, but he also knew the power of belief, of conviction. His presence alone inspired confidence, a reminder that they were following not just a general, but a man who had shaped empires with his own hands. Yet even he could not ignore the fragile web of threats surrounding them. Every torchlight in the distance, every shadow in the trees, seemed like an omen. Dawn brought the first clash. Caesar's detachment intercepted the militias, and the fight was brutal and sudden. Swords clashed, shields shattered, and the air was thick with dust and smoke. The legions moved with lethal precision, their discipline honed in years of Gaulish campaigns. Yet the resistance was fierce, born of fear, loyalty to Pompey, and a desperate hope to defend the Republic. Caesar watched from a small hill, observing the battle, calculating, understanding that each skirmish carried consequences far beyond the immediate. The victory was costly. Several of Caesar's trusted commanders were wounded, and morale wavered for a brief, frightening moment. But the momentum held. The militias were scattered, and the path toward the city remained open. Yet the encounter revealed an uncomfortable truth. Pompey was prepared, watching every move, and Caesar's every advantage could be stripped away with a single, well-timed blow. Inside Rome, the first stirrings of panic had begun. Citizens heard distant sounds of battle, faint at first, then growing louder as word spread. Merchants shuttered their shops, mothers clutched children, and senators huddled in secret, fearing that the city they had trusted to preserve the Republic might fall into chaos. Pompey himself had retreated to his stronghold, gathering forces and preparing for a confrontation that would decide the fate of the state. Caesar, however, did not pause to savor victory. He pressed forward, understanding that in war hesitation could be fatal. His soldiers followed, their loyalty tested not just by orders, but by the courage and vision of their leader. Every mile toward Rome was both a promise and a threat, an advance into history and into danger alike. Yet, as the legions approached the city walls, a startling twist threatened to unravel everything. A messenger arrived, breathless and disheveled, with news that Pompey had secured additional allies, including unexpected mercenary forces and political figures who had pledged loyalty to Caesar just weeks earlier. The ground beneath Caesar's feet seemed less certain, the stakes higher than ever. Every decision now carried the weight of life and death, victory and ruin, glory and betrayal. That night, camped on a hill overlooking Rome, Caesar walked alone once more. The city lay ahead, silent and unknowable, its fate suspended in the balance. Shadows moved among the ruins of old roads. Whispers carried by the wind spoke of conspiracies and choices yet to be made. Every torchlight could be a spy, every quiet street a trap. The Republic waited, but it was no longer a passive observer. It was a co-conspirator, ready to punish or reward depending on Caesar's next steps, and as he gazed at the sleeping city, a chilling thought struck him. Crossing the Rubicon had been only the beginning. The real battle, the battle for Rome itself, for the soul of the Republic, for the legacy of his life, was about to begin in earnest. History, as it would later be told, remembers the march. But the truth, the fear, the uncertainty, the calculations, and the whispered threats remains hidden in the shadows, waiting for those willing to peer into the dark heart of destiny. And just as the first light of dawn painted the city in gold, a sudden alarm shattered the quiet. Messengers ran through the camp, shouting that Pompey had mobilized a hidden force, moving through a road Caesar had considered secure. The trap was real, and Caesar's next decision would determine whether he seized Rome or perished trying. Rome watched, silent and vast as the wheels of destiny began to turn faster, the first sparks of civil war igniting in the distance, while Caesar's mind raced toward a confrontation that could rewrite everything. The city on the edge. Have you ever sensed that a moment in time is so critical, so explosive, that even the walls around you seem to hold their breath? That was Rome now, trembling as Julius Caesar's legions approached. a tide of steel and ambition threatening to wash over centuries of law, tradition, and fragile trust. Every street, every alley, every window of the city seemed alive, watching, waiting, ready to judge the choices of men whose destinies were intertwined with its fate. The first rays of dawn revealed Caesar's forces arrayed just outside the city gates. The legions, disciplined and lethal, stood in perfect formation, their banners fluttering like a warning to all who dared oppose them. Soldiers shifted uneasily, sensing the tension that even seasoned veterans could not fully explain. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that made hearts pound and breath catch. Every soldier knew they were part of history, yet few understood the full weight of what lay ahead. Inside Rome, panic and calculation warred within the Senate chambers. Senators who had once scoffed at Caesar's ambition now debated feverishly how to respond. Some urged negotiation, others demanded total resistance. Letters and messengers sped between allies and rivals, each one a thread in the web of treachery and loyalty that threatened to unravel at any moment. Pompey, confident but cautious, prepared to strike decisively. Knowing that hesitation could be fatal. Caesar, aware of Pompey's movements, studied the city from a distance, reading not just maps and reports but the very air of Rome itself. He had come prepared for resistance, but the scale of political and military opposition was more complex than anticipated. Messages arrived from supposed allies who were now uncertain, from towns where support had been promised but now wavered. The Republic's heartbeat, previously steady, now raced erratically, reflecting the chaos building in the shadows. Then came the first shock. Scouts reported that a previously secure route had been compromised. Forces loyal to Pompey had taken positions along a critical road, threatening Caesar's supply lines and the mobility of his army. It was a calculated trap, designed to delay him, perhaps to provoke a mistake that could cost him everything. Caesar's pulse quickened, yet his face remained calm. A mask perfected over years of campaigns in Gaul. Every general in the camp knew that Caesar's decisions in the coming hours could make or break their lives and the Republic itself. That night, under a sliver of moonlight, Caesar convened a council of war. The generals gathered, their expressions taut with tension. The plan was audacious. A smaller contingent would feint along the compromised road, drawing Pompey's forces into a controlled engagement. Meanwhile, the main army would shift through a less obvious route, moving closer to the city gates under cover of darkness. Precision, timing, and trust were essential. A single misstep could spell disaster. As the legions moved in the shadows, the city itself seemed to respond. Fires burned faintly in distant quarters, signaling both support and resistance. Citizens watched from windows, unsure whether to cheer, flee, or pray. The very streets of Rome became a chessboard, each move carrying consequences far beyond the immediate. And in the quiet corners of the city, whispers of betrayal stirred like restless ghosts. Some who had pledged loyalty to Caesar reconsidered, torn between fear, duty, and self-preservation. The first clash came before dawn. Caesar's feint engaged Pompey's forward units, and the battle was sudden, violent, and intense. Swords flashed, shields shattered, and the air rang with the cries of soldiers. Yet, even in the chaos, Caesar maintained control, directing movements with a precision that stunned his generals. His reputation as a strategist was not mere legend, it was reality. Unfolding in real time before a city on the brink, victory came at a cost. Some of his most trusted officers were wounded, the legions fatigued, yet the path to Rome remained open. Pompey had underestimated Caesar's audacity, yet he was not defeated. Hidden contingents moved within the city, preparing for ambush and barricades. Caesar realized that capturing the city would require more than military skill. It would require the ability to manipulate loyalty, fear, and ambition all at once. The night brought another twist. A secret faction within the Senate, previously thought neutral, had shifted allegiance. They approached Caesar with offers of support, but with conditions, veiled threats, and the unmistakable suggestion of betrayal. Caesar understood that in the corridors of power, trust was a currency far more fragile than steel. Accepting their aid could secure immediate advantage, but the long-term consequences were unknown, and possibly deadly dot in the early hours, Caesar walked through his camp alone. The soldiers slept uneasily, the distant sounds of Rome echoing through the hills. He could see the Tiber glinting under the rising sun, the city's rooftops bathed in gold. Yet beauty did not mask danger. Each street, each building, each shadow could conceal an enemy, a spy, a conspirator waiting for the right moment to strike. The Republic was alive, and it was watching, and then, just as Caesar considered the final approach to the city gates, news arrived that set the camp into chaos. Pompey had moved a hidden detachment into the northern approach, a maneuver no one had anticipated. The trap was nearly complete. Caesar's audacious plan now faced its most dangerous test. Could he adapt quickly enough, trust the loyalty of his men, and seize the advantage before the Republic itself erupted into civil war? The moment stretched like a taut wire. Every heartbeat echoed the weight of history, every breath carried the scent of destiny. The Rubicon had been crossed, the march executed, the first skirmishes fought, but the real reckoning was yet to come. Caesar's mind raced, calculating, anticipating, daring the impossible. The city waited, Pompey waited, and history held its breath. As the sun climbed higher, the legions adjusted, moving silently toward the hidden approach. Caesar rode at the front, a figure of calm resolve amid uncertainty, knowing that the coming hours would decide not just his fate, but the fate of Rome itself. Yet even he could not predict the full complexity of the game, the twists that the Senate and Pompey had prepared, or the consequences of the choices about to be made. And as the morning light cast long shadows over the city walls, a distant horn sounded, an alarm from within Rome itself. Pompey's hidden forces had been discovered moving into position earlier than expected. Chaos threatened to erupt on multiple fronts, and the next decision Caesar made would determine whether he would emerge as the undisputed master of Rome or be consumed in the fire of civil war. History remembers the triumphs, the speeches, the conquests, but the truth, the fear, the strategy, the whispers in the dark is often forgotten. Tonight, Caesar's gamble teetered on a knife's edge. The Republic awaited, and in its streets, in its shadows, the first true battles of civil war were about to ignite. Fire at the gates. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be at the heart of a storm that could destroy everything you've built in a single heartbeat? Imagine the streets of Rome trembling, torches flickering against walls, and every shadow hiding both friend and foe. This was the dawn of Caesar's reckoning, and the city itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion of ambition and fear. The gates of Rome were no longer merely doors. They were symbols, thresholds between order and chaos, law and power, loyalty and betrayal. Caesar's legions moved carefully through the outskirts, each soldier acutely aware that one misstep could spark disaster. The city, still alive with whispers and rumors, had begun to stir. Civilians peered cautiously from windows, merchants barred their doors, and the faint murmur of guards moved through narrow alleys like a warning. Pompey's forces had positioned themselves expertly, using the city's architecture as a maze of potential ambush. Streets that once carried the rhythm of daily life were now traps waiting to ensnare the unwary. Caesar's scouts reported every move, every hidden detachment, but the complexity of the city made prediction nearly impossible. Yet Caesar did not waver. His mind raced, anticipating every turn, every counter, every deceit that Pompey's seasoned commanders could unleash. The first clash erupted near the northern gate. Swords clashed, shields splintered, and the air was filled with the cries of soldiers and the panicked screams of civilians caught in the chaos. Caesar watched, observing the battlefield as though it were a living map, every movement calculated, every risk measured. The skirmish was brutal and fast, leaving no room for hesitation. And yet, amid the chaos, a surprising twist emerged. A faction of Pompey's troops, previously loyal, began to falter, some even retreating, revealing cracks in their discipline and loyalty. Seizing the moment, Caesar ordered his forces to press forward with relentless precision. The streets of Rome became a theater of strategy, every building a potential fortress, every alleyway a battleground. His commanders executed maneuvers honed over years in Gaul, yet the city itself challenged them at every step. Fires flared along rooftops, sending smoke curling into the sky, and the echoes of battle reverberated across marble statues and empty forums. Inside the Senate, panic reached its peak. Senators realized that their carefully laid plans could collapse in moments. Pompey, confident yet anxious, tried to rally his forces, but even his experience could not overcome the audacity and calculated ruthlessness of Caesar's advance. The political and military lines blurred, and the first waves of true civil war had begun. A sudden turning point arrived when news reached Caesar that reinforcements from the south, thought to be loyal to Pompey, had changed sides. Their allegiance now shifted toward Caesar, emboldening his legions and altering the balance of power. Yet this shift came with a dangerous condition, a promise of future political favors and influence. Accepting it could secure immediate advantage, but also entangle Caesar in the complex, treacherous politics of Rome. The fighting escalated, moving through the heart of the city. Statues toppled, markets burned, and streets ran thick with the debris of battle. Caesar's presence at the front inspired his men, yet he could not ignore the rising human cost. Soldiers and civilians alike fell, and the Republic itself seemed to bleed under the weight of ambition and conflict. Each victory brought both triumph and moral peril, a reminder that war is never clean and history is rarely kind amid the chaos. Another twist shattered the fragile sense of control. A trusted senator, secretly allied with Pompey, attempted to negotiate a ceasefire directly with Caesar, offering the surrender of certain key positions, but the offer was laced with deceit. Accepting it could open the gates safely, but it might also betray his soldiers and jeopardize the campaign. Caesar, with a mind sharpened by both strategy and instinct, discerned the danger immediately, rejecting the ruse while using the attempt to lure Pompey's forces into a trap. As the sun reached its zenith, the confrontation neared its climax. Caesar's forces, guided by both strategy and intuition, began to encircle Pompey's remaining units. The city that had once been the pride of the Republic now became a battlefield where history was forged in fire and blood. Every corner turned revealed new challenges: barricades, hidden snipers, an ambush designed to sap morale and slow the advance. Yet Caesar's adaptability, his understanding of both human psychology and military precision, kept his legions advancing steadily. By mid-afternoon, the first decisive victory had been secured. Pompey's forces were fragmented, retreating, and many of his allies began reconsidering their positions. The balance of power had shifted dramatically, yet the war was far from over. Caesar understood that while this battle could be won, the larger conflict for Rome's soul and for his own legacy would demand even greater audacity. As evening fell, Caesar surveyed the city from the Capitoline Hill. Fires burned across the horizon, smoke twisting skyward like the fingers of fate itself. The streets were quiet now, but only temporarily. The city's heartbeat remained erratic, and the Senate, scattered and shaken, plotted the next moves in the shadows. Caesar's victory had come at great cost, yet it had secured the critical foothold in Rome. The first phase of civil war was complete. But the war itself was far from over, and then, just as night descended, a messenger arrived, breathless and pale. Pompey had escaped the city with a significant portion of his forces, moving to rally reinforcements in the south. The trap Caesar had anticipated had not fully materialized, and a new threat emerged. Pompey's return, stronger and angrier, would demand even greater cunning and courage. The die had been cast, the first victories won, but the true reckoning was only beginning. History remembers the crossing of the Rubicon, the march and the battle for Rome, but the fear, the split-second decisions, the betrayals, the human cost often fades behind legend. And tonight, as Caesar's forces rested amid the ruins and fires of the city, the future remained uncertain. Rome was his to hold, but only if he could navigate the storm yet to come. The city slept uneasily, the embers of battle glowing in the distance, while Caesar's mind turned toward Pompey, toward the Senate, and toward the war that would decide the fate of the Republic once and for all. And as the shadows lengthened, one question lingered unresolved. Echoing through both history and time, could one man truly bend a republic to his will? Or would the forces arrayed against him finally prove insurmountable? The reckoning of Rome. Have you ever witnessed a city teetering on the edge of destruction, where every street, every stone, and every shadow seems to vibrate with the tension of history itself? Rome was now that city. Julius Caesar stood at the center of a storm he had unleashed, and the Republic, fragile and divided, quivered under the weight of one man's ambition. Tonight we see not only the triumphs, but the costs, the fear, the strategy, the betrayals, and the raw humanity that history often forgets. The dawn broke over a city still smoking from yesterday's battles. Caesar's legions, though weary, moved with disciplined purpose, securing key positions and stabilizing areas previously under Pompey's control. Streets that had witnessed bloodshed now bore the cautious steps of soldiers maintaining order, their armor glinting in the rising sun. But Caesar knew this calm was temporary. Pompey, though defeated in the immediate confrontation, was not yet vanquished. His forces had retreated south, gathering strength for a counterattack that could engulf the Republic in a new wave of chaos. Inside the Senate, fear and calculation battled for dominance. Senators who had plotted against Caesar now debated whether to flee, resist, or negotiate. Some saw opportunity in his victories. Others feared their lives, their influence, and the very foundations of the Republic. The city itself became a theater of power, where decisions made in shadowed chambers would ripple across streets and hills alike. Caesar understood that victory required more than swords. It demanded perception, diplomacy, and psychological mastery. As he moved through the city, observing the aftermath, Caesar noted the resilience and despair of the people. Civilians, caught in the chaos of ambition, had suffered, yet their lives carried on. Markets reopened cautiously, children peered from behind shuttered windows, and whispers of loyalty began to circulate. Caesar's presence alone reassured some and terrified others, a reminder that history was being written in real time and that he was both author and actor. Then came the turning point. Reports arrived that Pompey had rallied new allies, mercenaries, loyal governors, and disaffected senators, and was preparing to strike from multiple directions. The threat was immediate and formidable. Caesar's strategic mind raced, weighing probabilities, calculating risk, and anticipating his rivals' moves. Every decision now carried exponential consequences. To misstep was not merely defeat, it was annihilation. Yet Caesar's confidence, honed over years of campaigns and battles, allowed him to embrace audacity. In a bold move, Caesar divided his forces. A smaller contingent was sent to shadow Pompey's movements, engaging in skirmishes that would disrupt, delay, and confuse the enemy. Meanwhile, the main army advanced with precision towards strategic strongholds, cutting supply lines and securing loyalty from previously hesitant towns. The city of Rome itself became a chessboard, each maneuver executed with both military brilliance and political foresight. The climax arrived on the plains near the Tiber. Pompey's forces, strengthened and emboldened, faced Caesar in a confrontation that would determine the fate of the Republic. The battle was sudden, chaotic, and intense. Steel clashed, arrows darkened the sky, and the cries of men echoed across fields that had once carried only the sounds of daily life. Caesar's presence at the front inspired his legions. While his strategic foresight allowed him to outmaneuver Pompey's forces, turning their own confidence into a liability, yet the battle was not without personal cost. Trusted generals fell, soldiers were wounded, and the human toll weighed heavily even on Caesar, whose mind was always calculating, always planning. The twist that would haunt the Republic unfolded in the aftermath. Pompey's retreat was not merely tactical. Some of his allies, convinced of Caesar's inevitable success, abandoned him mid-battle, shifting the balance decisively. The collapse of Pompey's coalition marked the beginning of Caesar's unchallenged dominance. Yet it also foreshadowed the moral and political complexities to come. By nightfall, the immediate threat was neutralized. Caesar's forces controlled key routes, and Pompey's army had been scattered. The Republic's capital, though battered and bruised, remained under Caesar's influence. And yet, victory brought no simple joy. The streets of Rome were filled with the smoke of destruction, the echoes of screams, and the silent grief of those who had paid the cost of ambition. Caesar walked among the remnants of his triumph, understanding that history would remember glory, but often forget the human suffering that accompanied it. In the quiet of the night, Caesar reflected on the choice that had begun at all the crossing of the Rubicon. One river, one step, one decision that had shattered the equilibrium of centuries. The Republic was broken, yes, but in its place a new order, shaped by audacity, strategy, and sheer force of will, began to emerge. The stakes had been immense, the risks unimaginable, and the consequences irreversible. Yet, in the heart of the man who had dared, there was a vision of Rome remade, stronger, more centralized, more enduring, at least in his mind. The final twist arrived as news reached him that certain senators, fearing the inevitability of his rise, had fled the city, taking with them critical knowledge and secrets that could one day challenge his authority. History, it seemed, was never truly controlled, and even the greatest victories carried shadows of uncertainty. Caesar understood that the war for Rome was not merely about armies and battles, it was about loyalty, perception, and the fragile psychology of power. And so, as the first stars appeared above a city trembling but alive, Caesar gazed toward the horizon. The Republic had been broken, the first acts of civil war had concluded, yet the story was far from finished. Pompey would rise again, factions would continue plotting, and the people of Rome would carry memories of both fear and hope. Caesar had won the battle, but the war for the soul of Rome, the war that would define his legacy and the fate of the Republic, was only beginning. History remembers the crossing of the Rubicon, the march and the conquest of Rome, but the truth, the suspense, the strategy, the fear, the human cost remains alive in the shadows, waiting for those willing to witness the full reckoning. And as we step back from the smoke-filled streets and the quieted battlegrounds, we are left with a question that echoes across centuries. Can a single man truly bend a republic to his will? Or does history, like the Rubicon itself, flow onward, indifferent to the ambitions of mortals? The die had been cast. Rome would never be the same. And as the night deepened, one thought lingered in Caesar's mind and in ours. The story of ambition, courage, and reckoning was far from over.